learners, and welcome to this video, the fifth lecture in this NPTEL course titled 20th Century Poetry. As promised in the previous lecture and as naturally introduced in the previous lecture, today we will enter a detailed and thorough discussion and close reading of the first poem in this course on 20th century poetry. The poem, as many of you will remember from my previous lectures where I've teased this poem, is The Lake Isle of Innisfree by the Irish-British poet William Butler Yeats. Before I actually begin reading the poem, I want to say a few things about the poem and introduce the poem. This poem, which some of you may have heard of and may have even studied or read in other contexts, happens to be among the most popular poems by William Butler Yeats. In the year 1999, two institutions, a newspaper and a literary magazine, the Irish Times and Poetry Ireland respectively, conducted a poll. In this poll, they asked their readers to pick and vote for their favorite Irish poem of all time. Apart from the fact that Lake Isle of Innisfree topped the list, that is to say, Lake Isle of Innisfree was voted as the favorite Irish poem of all time by readers of these two very popular publications, William Butler Yeats himself appears to have topped the list. Yeats appears to be the most popular Irish poet of all time, and this is known from the numbers. In the poems that were finally established as this most favorite poems of Irish people, Yeats had 25 poems in the top 100 and 6 in the top 10. Of these, the number one spot, the favorite Irish poem of all time, as voted by the readers of Irish newspapers and literary magazines, was Lake Isle of Innisfree. Now, some facts about the poem will be useful as we go forward. The poem was composed in the year 1888 and was published in the journal The National Observer in the year 1890. Some more facts about the island that the poem refers to. It is set on a small island in Lough Gill in the county Sligo of northwestern Ireland. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, Sligo is in the northwest of Ireland, a beautiful sea-facing land, a pristine beauty, breathtaking natural beauty, among the most beautiful places in Ireland. It also happens to be the place of Yeats's maternal grandparents. This was a place of great material and maternal comfort, a place that housed a huge and luxurious mansion, house spread on an estate of 60 acres. This was a place where the Yeats family spent a lot of the children's summer vacations, as well as many of the early years of Yeats's childhood. So this was a very special place. It was a place of belonging. It signified a very deep and fundamental place of comfort. It was a place very close to the poet's soul, if we may use that word. These are the facts about Sligo, the water body Lough Gill, which housed a lot of islands, one of which was Innisfree, the island that the poet writes about in this poem. The structure and language of the poem signify a very clear Victorian inheritance. That is to say, this signifies that Yeats was a poet who was born in the middle of the 19th century and began writing poetry towards the end of the 19th century. The poem has an archaic diction and syntax. The poem carries very visible, palpable, tangible evidence of rhythmic, rhyming, and metrical verse. This was a style of writing poetry which was popular in the 19th century. This was a style of writing poetry which would decline as the 20th century got on board. And yet we find that this is a poem which maintains a very careful use of rhyme and meter. In this sense, it is a Victorian poem. It signifies that Yeats had 2 feet in 2 different eras. Yeats was a poet with one leg very firmly in the 19th century and the other, which would be seen in the second half of his career, very much in the 20th century. So Yeats will write poems which maintain that Victorian elegance of rhythm and meter, but which also move away from that reliance on rhythm and meter and focus on clear ideas, on powerful emotions, irrespective of meter. So for Yeats, rhythm is important in order to establish a ground, in order to begin saying something, in order to begin creating and describing an emotion. But ultimately, it is the emotion, it is the power of the idea which is far more important than the words and the arrangement of sounds used to convey that emotion. We will see that happen in this poem as a clear and very symmetrical arrangement of words and sounds gives way to a powerful emotion which breaks free of that structure of sound and word. There are some very modern tensions, the ideas that I mentioned. There is a powerful interplay of ideas that we see in this poem, which breaks free of that very Victorian arrangement of rhyme, meter, and sound. What are these ideas? There is a very powerful tension between different ideas of freedom. There is a clear acknowledgement of a power relationship which was created by the colonial occupation of Ireland by England. There is a tension between all that is signified by London and all that is signified by Ireland. These are different things, equally powerful but very different. There's a tension between personal and national ideas of freedom. All of these ideas are established and set in play by the Romantic and Victorian era arrangement of sounds and words, but these ideas nonetheless supersede and transcend the arrangement in which they are placed. The poem is a sort of urban myth or legend. It refers to a lot of places, and today, in contemporary Ireland, given the popularity of the poem, the word Innisfree has detached from what the poet was saying and has become a part of an urban myth. If one travels in the County Sligo, Ireland today, one can find countless references to the poem, specifically through the word Innisfree. So for instance, one can find there's an Innisfree hotel, there are apartments named Innisfree Court, there are musical groups such as the Innisfree String Quartet, there are football clubs such as the Innisfree Celtics, there are cycling groups, bus companies, automobile workshops such as Innisfree Service Station, as well as gift shops such as the Innisfree Crystal and Innisfree Potteries. And speaking of a context closer home to us in India, a few years ago, I witnessed the start or the release of a brand of skincare products which also had the name Innisfree. I'm not sure what has happened since of that brand, if it is still functional or not, but I remember very clearly that this word Innisfree had been used to market something in India as well. So this shows the great popularity of the word Innisfree. And one reason for that popularity is not simply the fact that William Butler Yeats used it in a poem, but the fact that the poem itself carries a great deal of power. There is something very musical, something very enchanting, something very magical in the word Innisfree, specifically in the sound Innisfree, and how these sounds and the word Innisfree came together to convey a very unique, powerful, somewhat discomforting, but ultimately very, very lasting set of emotional impacts that the poem as a whole conveyed. Now, let us reflect a little more on the facts of Innisfree. So while these are some references and some tributes paid to the name, there are some accounts of the literal and geographical island Innisfree itself. One contemporary Irish journalist decided to travel to Innisfree, the literal island named Innisfree, and to describe it, and found that this island was very different, it is very different from the way Yeats describes it. Here is what the journalist writes. Innisfree has a mainly rough and rocky shoreline. The island itself, about 1 acre in area, is covered in because of its beauty or for the story's sake, but I was 22 or 3 before I gave up the dream. That is, it is covered in rough shrubbery. It is probably the most inhospitable place in Lake Isle. While this may be the place that Yeats had in mind when he composed the famous poem, this is surely no way to describe the beauties of the poem, the beauties of the space. The space itself was highly unromantic, and it was merely an excuse for Yeats to imagine longing, to imagine idyllic island that he would want to travel to. Yeats had no idea of the exact nature of this space, but he knew enough that it was close to his maternal grandparents' place in Sligo. It was close to the landscape of Sligo that he knew, and that was enough for Yeats to imagine an idyllic symbol, a symbol of peace and calm, a symbol of removal from London, the urban corruption and the ills of cities, and a symbol of his own escape and the solace that he would find by removing himself from London, the urban center. So the facts, as journalists have found, is that this island is highly inhospitable and unromantic. Nonetheless, this inhospitable and unromantic island becomes, in Yeats's poem, the symbol of romance, calm, peace, and a sort of rejuvenating power that nature has for a person who is too exhausted by living in a city. The journalist writes that Innisfree is in fact overgrown and rather underwhelming, and there are many other islands which are more picturesque than Innisfree. And there is even a local legend that some local fishermen referred to the inhospitable Innisfree as Rat Island. The phrase Rat Island stands in stark contrast to the beautiful, calm, peaceful images that Yeats creates in his poem. And yet this shows us that Yeats's imagination of Innisfree had little to do with the actual space and had more to do with the kinds of emotional turmoil and emotional tensions that this young man was going through at that particular point in the late 19th century. Let us try and understand some autobiographical reasons for why Yeats wrote this poem and what were those emotional turmoils, or what was the emotional context from which these words emerged. This is what Yeats writes in his 1915 volume, the first part of a series of autobiographies. Yeats writes, "There was a story in the country history." The book is William Gregory Wood Martin's History of Sligo, published 1882. The story was of a tree that had once grown upon that island, guarded by some terrible monster, and borne the fruit of the gods. A young girl pined for the fruit and told her lover to kill the monster and carry the fruit away. He did as he had been told, but tasted the fruit. And when he reached the mainland where she waited for him, he was dying of its powerful virtue. And from sorrow and remorse, she too ate of it and died. I do not remember whether I chose the island because of its beauty or for the story's sake, but I was 22 or 3 before I gave up the dream. So this shows that Yeats was a thorough poet. Yeats was a person who thought of a place through the myths, through the stories, through the fictional accounts that circulated among people of that place. This was a poet who cared more for personal as well as collective memory. It was the way people remembered a place that made a place real for Yeats. Yeats did not have the scientist or the surveyor's or the politician's idea of a place. Instead, he had a very curious and enthusiastic and sympathetic person's view of a place. He longed for the people of Ireland. He was very fond of the stories that Irish people told of a place. And through these stories, Yeats created an image of a place about which he decided to write a poem. Further, some more autobiographical context. In another section of his autobiographies, first published in the year 1921, Yeats described the genesis of the poem in London. That is, Yeats was in London when he decided to write this poem. Yeats writes, and I quote, "I had still the ambition formed in Sligo in my teens of living in imitation of Thoreau on Innisfree. And when walking through Fleet Street, very homesick, I heard a little tinkle of water and saw a fountain in a shop window which balanced a little bell upon its jet, and began to remember lake water. From the sudden remembrance came my poem Innisfree, my first lyric with anything in its rhythm of my own music." Two very important things emerge from this paragraph, autobiographical writing, that Yeats was homesick. The imagination of a place in Ireland is motivated not by knowledge, objective ideas or information or data about Ireland, but rather it is triggered by a memory of home, by a memory that a young man has when he is missing home. Right? Who is this young man? Yeats himself. Fleet Street is in London. It's a street where a lot of publishing, writing takes place. He's trying to make it as a writer in London, and he is very homesick. While walking down this street, Fleet Street in London, something triggers a memory. A sound of water, a sound of a bell held inside the window of a shop. The sound of a fountain and the sound of a bell connects in the poet's mind and reminds the poet of the sound of water from a very different context. It remembers the gently lapping sounds of lake water. Lake water laps against the shore in a way that's similar to seawater, but very different. The sound of lake water is much more calming, much more peaceful, and much more comforting, although equally rhythmic as seawater. But this is the lake water that Yeats remembers, and this triggers the set of ideas and emotions which culminate in the poem. This is the first important idea. The second idea that emerges from these words is that Yeats himself considers Innisfree to be a beginning of sorts. Innisfree, not the place, Innisfree, the poem. Lake Isle of Innisfree. This poem is sort of a beginning for Yeats because, in his own words, this was the first poem in which he felt that he had achieved something of his own voice. Right? He writes, "with anything in its rhythm of my own music." Right? Rhythm here appears to be something that's laid down by others. The poet inherits rhythms from other poets. The poet inherits rhythms, ways of organizing sounds from what he has learned from other poets. Music is what the poet creates by adding his own voice to what he inherits from others. This is a struggle for all poets and is especially an acute struggle for young poets, poets who are beginning to write. The struggle to create a unique voice, a unique combination of sounds and styles inherited, as well as sounds and styles uniquely their own. And Yeats credits himself with producing a successful combination of these inherited as well as inherent sounds and words in this poem, Lake Isle of Innisfree. Let us now take a moment and read the poem and try and get a very initial, very basic sense of what is going on in this poem before we go on to a deeper analysis of the poem. The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. "I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of morning to where the cricket sings, their midnights all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. The first thing to note about these words is that they are a declaration of a person's intentions. The poet is saying a lot of things, but all of those things have one common feature. They are describing the poet's desires. The poet wishes for something which he does not currently have, and he is describing in great detail that which he does not have, that which he would like to have. The details involve descriptions of nature, plants, some animals, birds, the sounds created by bees. He also describes an emotional state. He says that he shall have some peace there. Even though peace is difficult, but peace has a quality. It comes dropping slow. Peace is also associated with nature, the sound of crickets singing. Peace is associated with the sights of afternoon, the colors that the day shows as the day progresses from midnight to afternoon to evening. Finally, the poet again declares that he will arise and go now. He continuously speaks in the future tense, as if convincing himself, as if reassuring himself that in the future he will achieve something that he does not currently have. And along with the sense of the future, there's also something in the present. The poet says, I will go, I will do, etc. But he also says, I hear. So even though he is not at Innisfree, he does not have all of those peace-inducing, calm-producing realities, settings, contexts. He can still hear some of those things. His senses are still attuned, already attuned, in anticipation to what he will see there. So he can hear lake water lapping while he stands on the roadway or on the pavement's grey. So this tells us that even though the poet longs for something, he also admits that his longing is not for an actual, for a real object, but rather a state of mind, because he has already achieved a part of what he longs for while currently articulating that longing. So there's something in what he longs for which he does not have, which he can only have when in the future he goes to Innisfree. But there's also something in what he longs for which he already has. That is, he already can hear the lake water, even though he stands on the roadway. Even though he is surrounded by grey pavements, he can hear the sound of lake water lapping the shore. It is this contradiction and this tension between these two senses, a sense of needing to achieve something that he does not have, and a sense of already having achieved that he does not have. So it's a contradictory longing. The question that the poet seeks to illuminate but is unable to answer is, what is the nature of longing? When we long for something, are we longing for the object itself, or are we longing for a state of mind which we anticipate we will inhabit when we achieve that object? And if it is the latter, if we are longing for a state of mind, then why do we need the object? If we can already inhabit a little bit of that state of mind. So these are some of the questions that the poet illuminates and hints at. And we will embark on a detailed study and analysis of these themes in the next lecture, in which we will continue discussing the poem and also conclude our discussion of this very iconic, very influential poem by William Butler Yeats. Thank you.